Good morning, everyone. Today we will be dealing with mitral valve disorders. The mitral stenosis was one of the most common clinical case given to an undergraduate, and it was one of the most prevalent cardiac disease of the past. Recently, however, the incidence of mitral stenosis have been decreasing due to the effective use of antibiotics for in the pediatric age group for any pharyngitis or acute rheumatic fever. It is better treated. The incidence of RHD is on the down, but still we get cases of rheumatic heart disease. Now, first, before knowing about the mitral stenosis, we will be dealing with what is the mitral valve apparatus. What are the structure of mitral apparatus? First, we are looking down from the atrium, from the upper side, we have the two mitral leaflets, the anterior mitral leaflet and the posterior mitral leaflet. The anterior mitral leaflet are three areas: A1, A2, and A3. And the posterior mitral leaflet are again three areas: P1, P2, and P3. The central area is the most important area. This is the anterior mitral leaflet, and this is the posterior mitral leaflet. So as you can see, the anterior mitral leaflet is somewhat bigger. It covers it is somewhat larger, and the posterior mitral wall is thinner, and it is the one that is more common for prolapse. And you have seen the junction as well as the commissures. You have got the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure, and you can also have the other structures, namely the two papillary muscles. These two are the papillary muscles, and from the papillary muscle to the leaflets, you can have a lot of chordate tendinae. So this is the papillary muscle, and there are two papillary muscles, namely an anteromedial papillary muscle and a posterolateral papillary muscle. The anteromedial papillary muscle has got dual blood supply, and it has got less chance of necrosis or infarction. It will be involved only in an anterior wall MI. Whereas the posteromedial papillary muscle has got a single blood supply by the right coronary artery. Hence, in a case of right coronary artery occlusion and this in inferior wall MI, this posteromedial papillary muscle can be ruptured, and rupture of the posteromedial papillary muscle can present as acute mitral regurgitation. This papillary muscle is connected to the valve leaflets with the help of chordate tendinae. And there are three types of chordate tendinae: the primary, secondary, and tertiary chordate tendinae. The primary is attached to the tip of the leaflets, and then to the base and to the surrounding areas. So this is the primary, secondary, and tertiary chordate tendinae, and you have got the two mitral leaflets, anterior and posterior mitral leaflets, and you have the two papillary muscles. Together, they form the mitral valve apparatus. Okay, now we will be dealing with the causes of mitral stenosis. As we all know, the most common cause of mitral stenosis is rheumatic heart disease. Rheumatic heart disease was one of the most prevalent cause of rheumatic heart for mitral stenosis in the developing countries. It can involve mitral valve chronic following an acute rheumatic fever. The mitral valve mitral leaflets will go for chronic inflammation. This chronic inflammation will result in the thickening of valve leaflets, and there is also fibrosis of the valve leaflets. This will be followed by calcification of the valve leaflets. Both the papillary muscles and the chordate tendinae will go for contraction, and the mitral orifice will appear as a fish mouth or a buttonhole orifice. So first cause is the rheumatic heart disease. The other causes for mitral stenosis include connective tissue disorders like SLE, rheumatoid arthritis. That can be because of an infective endocarditis. It can be congenital causes of mitral stenosis, namely cor triatriatum or a parachute mitral valve or a right atrial myxoma. These are the left atrial myxoma. All of this can present as mitral stenosis. So, what is the pathophysiology? So, what happens because of mitral stenosis? Normally, the blood flows from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle it enters in the aorta. When the mitral valve is stenosed, the blood flow from the left atrium to left ventricle is decreased. So, for heart to maintain the cardiac output, the left atrial pressure must be increased. The left atrium should force to push the blood across the stenotic valve into the left ventricle in order to maintain the cardiac output. So, there will be increase in left atrial pressure. That is the compensation. So what happens is the sequelae. First, the pressure This is the mitral valve, this is the left atrium, and this is the left atrium opens into the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins. First, when the left atrial pressure increases, this left atrial pressure will be transferred into the pulmonary veins, and the pulmonary veins will go for pulmonary venous hypertension. Pulmonary veins will be followed by, this will be here the pulmonary capillaries and the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery will open into the right atrium and the right ventricle, and this is the right atrium. The first and foremost point about mitral stenosis is that the left ventricle is usually normal. There won't be any diastolic issues, there won't be any problem with the left ventricle. Left ventricle will be spared in most of the cases mitral stenosis. So, first there will be increase in pressure within the left atrium. This increased because of the mitral stenosis. Here you have a stenosed valve. There will be enlargement of left atrium first. Then there will be atrial fibrillation because the left atrium is enlarged. There will be numerous ectopic focus which will be firing, especially at the site of insertion of the pulmonary veins. This will start to produce numerous ectopic firing. This will increase the risk of atrial fibrillation. Thirdly, there will be stasis of blood within the left atrial appendage. This stasis of blood within the left atrial appendage will cause left atrial thrombosis. This is stage 3. Then the pulmonary veins. There will be pulmonary venous hypertension. This increased left atrial pressure will be transferred backwards into the pulmonary vessels, and this pressure will be transferred backwards to the pulmonary capillaries, pulmonary arteries, and eventually it will go for pulmonary arterial hypertension. So first there is a pulmonary changes. There is a backflow of pressure across the pulmonary capillaries. Secondly, there will be pulmonary venous constriction, pulmonary arteriolar constriction. That is called as the second stenosis. Thirdly, there will be appearance of interstitial edema within the pulmonary vasculature. Fourthly, there will be obliterative changes and formation of pulmonary hypertension. As a consequence of pulmonary hypertension, this right ventricle will go for dilatation, and this pressure changes will be transferred to the right atrium. Right atrium will also go for dilatation, and there will be regurgitation. The pulmonary regurgitation will be present, and you can have tricuspid regurgitation because of the elevated pressure, and because of pulmonary hypertension, the flow across the pulmonary wall will be difficult. So you have an ESM, the ejection systolic murmur at the pulmonary area. So since the blood flows from the left atrium to the left ventricle, it will be forced. You have got a mid diastolic murmur in the mitral area. So now we'll start with the symptoms of left pulmonary stenosis. The symptoms can be either because of an enlarged left atrium. Left atrium is enlarged. It can compress the esophagus, causing dysphagia. It can compress the bronchus, causing difficulty in breathing. It can compress the recurrent laryngeal nerve, causing breathlessness, causing hoarseness of voice. That is called as Hartnuss syndrome. Secondly, because of atrial fibrillation, it can cause palpitation. It can cause syncope. It can produce thrombus and thromboembolic manifestation. They can present with a CVA or a peripheral embolism that can be found. Thirdly, because of the right ventricular failure, they can present with facial puffiness, raised JVP, abdominal distension, pedal edema, and prominent JVP. In the JVP, what are the signs of mitral stenosis? First sign we will be having is the pulse. The pulse can be irregular if it is an atrial fibrillation, or it can be normal. If it's a severe mitral stenosis, it may be low volume pulse. And the pulse pressure can be narrow. If there is a severe mitral stenosis, we can have hypotension. Then the JVP, because of the increase in right atrial pressure, there can be prominent A wave. Because of the tricuspid regurgitation, there can be a prominent B wave. Then there can be evidence of RV enlargement in the form of epigastric pulsation, precordial bulge, parasternal heave. Then they can have ejection systolic, then murmurs. Coming to murmurs, they can have a mid diastolic murmur at the apical region. This is because after the closure of second heart zone and the opening of the mitral valve, there will be a phase called as the isovolumic ventricular relaxation phase. And following the opening of mitral valve, which usually occurs in the mid diastole only, then that is when you get a flow from the left atrium left ventricle. So we have a mid diastolic murmur. Then Because of then you have other murmurs like ejection systolic murmur at the pulmonary area. You can have a loud P2 because of pulmonary hypertension. You can have a tricuspid regurgitation at the tricuspid area, which will be increased with inspiration. This is called as Carvalho's sign. Then you can have a pulmonary regurgitation murmur. There is a Graham-Stein murmur. It is an early diastolic murmur. The other auscultatory findings of mitral stenosis include loud S1, opening snap, and a pre-systolic accentuation. There are three classical findings found in mitral stenosis. So clinically, how do you assess the severity of mitral stenosis? Basically by 2 points. That is the duration of diastolic murmur. When the duration of diastolic murmur is increased, it will be a severe mitral stenosis. When there is appearance of S2, the narrowing of the S2 opening snap, then also you can call it a severe mitral stenosis. The pre-systolic accentuation is because of the rapid atrial contraction that occurs at the end of the diastole. Opening snap is due to the sudden billowing of the mitral wall, mitral leaflets due to the isovalvular auricular contraction phase. Loud S1 is the classically seen if the mitral wall leaflets are pliable. If they become soft, the mitral wall soft or there is associated with mitral regurgitation, the S1 won't be loud. Differential diagnosis. Differential diagnosis. Okay, what are the differential diagnoses of mitral stenosis? Anything with an MDM at the apex. There are 4 differential diagnoses. Namely, first one is the Carey-Coombs murmur. The Carey-Coombs murmur is a case seen in acute rheumatic fever following rheumatic vasculitis. There will be inflammation involving both the mitral leaflets that can present as MDM. But there won't be any opening snap, there won't be any pre-systolic accentuation, there won't be any loud S1. Second one is the aortic regurgitation. Aortic regurgitation can cause something called as there will be filling of the LV, and this will cause the floating of both the mitral valve leaflets. Because this floating of mitral valve leaflets can produce a functional obstruction, and this is called as the Austin-Flint murmur. Then the third differential diagnosis will be left atrial myxoma. Left atrial myxoma, but you can differentiate with the help of fever. The patient can have raised interleukin 6, raised WBC counts. The patient can have weight loss and other symptoms of embolism that can be found. The other differential diagnosis will be this will conclude differential diagnosis. How do you investigate? How do you investigate a patient with mitral stenosis? ECG. As we know, what are the 2 changes that occur in mitral stenosis? There will be left atrial enlargement, there will be right ventricular hypertrophy and right atrial enlargement, and there can be atrial fibrillation. These 4 changes will be seen in an ECG. Left atrial enlargement will be characterized by a broad P wave or a bifid P wave in lead V1 or lead 2. That is the leads you have to see the P waves. If it is broad P waves, you have to think of left atrial enlargement. Right atrial enlargement, we have a tall peaked P waves, more than 2.5 small boxes. Here also there is with this more than 2.5 small boxes, you have to think of left atrial enlargement. Then there can be evidence of right ventricular hypertrophy. Right ventricular hypertrophy will be characterized by the prominent R wave in lead V1 and V2. The RS ratio will be more than 1 and the R wave will be more than 7 small box. That is the right ventricular hypertrophy. Then atrial fibrillation can be characterized by absence of P wave, irregular RR interval. This will classically, and the heart rate is more than 150 or more than 100. This will diagnose atrial fibrillation. Then you can take a chest X-ray. In a chest X-ray, you can have 5 findings. First, there can be narrowing of the left heart border. That is the first finding. Second, you can have, and because of the enlarged left atrium, it can produce a double bubble sign. Thirdly, it can, because of the left atrial enlargement, it can push the esophagus. It can compress the esophagus, which can be seen in the lateral view, or it can push the bronchi. Splaying of the carina can be seen. Then you can have evidence of Pulmonary hypertension. Pulmonary hypertension, the prominent central pulmonary artery and peripheral pruning. Then you can find evidence of pulmonary edema. There will be prominent upper lobe pulmonary veins, or patient can have Kelly B lines. They can the middle and lower lobe Kelly B lines because of interstitial thickening. These findings can be seen. Then you have to do one 2D echo. This is the most sensitive investigation you can do in a patient with mitral stenosis. This can gauge what is the orifice size, what is the gradient between the left atrium and left ventricle, what is the pulmonary artery pressure, what is the left atrial pressure. These are the most important things which can help us decide about treatment. You can also identify if there is any presence of an LA thrombus. This is one of the most important investigations that is to be done. The other investigations includes cardiac coronary angiography or a coronary angio. If it's a high risk patient, before doing if it's a patient is high risk patient, or if it's a doubtful evidence of an ACS, if it's high probability for ACS, you can do an angiography to identify any block. Or if it's a low risk patient, you can do an CT coronary angiography to identify any presence of any obstructive coronary artery disease. So this is how we investigate. So then how do you manage? Is medical management is what is done. Medical management, first if there is evidence of, you have to put the patient on penicillin prophylaxis. Penicillin prophylaxis, Pentix, usually given to prevent a secondary attack of streptococcal pharyngitis. Then the patient should be put on infective endocarditis prophylaxis if the patient is having a previous history of infective endocarditis. If the patient is in failure symptoms, you can go for fluid restriction, salt restriction, low dose of diuretics like Lasix, they can be tried. If the patient is having atrial fibrillation, then you have to go for a rate control in the end of beta blocker or a calcium channel blocker or a digoxin, or you have to go for anticoagulations. Anticoagulation must be done only with warfarin. The newer anticoagulants like rivaroxaban, apixaban are not approved for treatment in a case of rheumatic heart disease. How do you treat? Surgically. When do you go for surgery? Any patient with a severe mitral stenosis. So severe mitral stenosis means the orifice size is less than 1 square centimeter. This is severe. If it is 1 to 2 square centimeter is mild, moderate. If it is 1 to 1.5 is moderate. 1.5 to 2 is mild mitral stenosis. And if the pulmonary artery systolic pressure is more than 50 millimeters of mercury, or if the gradient, transvalvular gradient, is more than 10 millimeters of mercury. This is when you count it as a severe mitral stenosis. In any patient with severe mitral stenosis who is symptomatic, take him for surgery. If the patient even moderate mitral stenosis, if he is having symptoms, you can take him for surgery. This is important. Then what are the two types of surgery you can do? You can either go for a mitral valve repair or replacement, or you can go for a percutaneous balloon mitral commissurotomy. Who are the patients you can take up for percutaneous balloon mitral commissurotomy? If the patient is having isolated mitral stenosis with a pliable leaflets, if there is no scarring of the subvalvular structures, and there is high contraindication for a high-risk surgery, in those patients you can go for percutaneous balloon mitral commissurotomy. Mitral valve replacement can be done in patients who are having mitral stenosis with a mitral regurgitation. If there is enlarged left atrium, or if there is a presence of calcified mitral valve, with the presence of mitral valve thrombus, if the mitral valve echo score is more than 8, in all these conditions you have to go for mitral valve replacement. So, summing up, our rheumatic heart disease is one of the most common clinical examination question, and it is one of the most prominent cardiac condition that is being evaluated in the routine cardiac OPDs. You have to have this basic idea for both patient management and also for your examination. Thank you.